This video podcast is going to cover case conceptualization, explaining why we're doing it, and also walking you through the process of case conceptualization. So before you watch this video, you might want to print a copy of the PowerPoint to take notes. That's up to you. Also of the case conceptualization outline as well, so you can take notes on that. So case conceptualization means a complete understanding of your client from a theoretical framework. This helps you understand the client, what's going on currently, how the past is integrated into what's happening, and also what might happen in the future. And as you're working with the client over time, it'll help you understand things as they come up, because you'll have a very solid basis of what's going on. It's an integrated system of understanding, again, that whole client. We are wellness model and holistic, and we believe looking at the entire client and explaining the healthy and unhealthy components of the client, because we're strength-based. Remember, counselors are strength-based. So we use conceptualization to help you integrate the theories into your counseling in this class particularly, okay? But it also will help you not only understand the client conceptualization skills that you're going to use to teach you theory, because using something will help you learn it better than just memorizing about it, right? Memorizing facts. But also, once you are a counselor at the end of the program, this is the way that you're going to be able to think about clients to be able to help them. And yes, that includes school counseling, where you're going to be speaking to students for 10 or 15 minutes, and higher ed, where you're going to be speaking to students for 10 or 15 minutes. This helps you view the clients holistically and not just as people with a problem, which again is the whole point of counseling as a field, is we're much more about the client as a human being first. Problems and diagnoses second. So the point of case conceptualization is for you to infer, delve, predict, really get an understanding of what's going on with your client without bringing in your own biases. So a lot of the writing, when you go back and read it, will be able to check it for bias to help you not bring bias into your work with clients. And also, when you develop your case conceptualization, you're going to, again, be able to think about, how can I help this client as a whole? How can I work with this client? So the theoretical base is where we're going to start. And in the theories class, sometimes you're going to be giving a theory base to work, and for the midterm and final, you get to choose a theory base to work with. Hopefully, by the end of the program, once you go through practicum and internship, you'll have developed a basics of your own theoretical framework and chosen a theory base for you. That will help you understand the client, have a basis to work from, and have an understanding of how you're going to work with the client to create goals to help the client be where he or she wants to be by the end of counseling. All right, so where do we start? Now what, right? So if we go through the outline, the first thing is descriptive data. Now, for this class is a little different than if you were, say, in a clinic or doing a staffing or having a discussion with your boss in school counseling, those kinds of things, right? Then they would need a lot more information about the client. But I am writing the cases for you, so you do not write the case back to me. Also, when we get to the part where the theory base is integrated, you're going to be using a lot of examples from the case. So, and you have page limits for your midterm and final. So the first part of this case conceptualization is actually going to be one of the shortest parts, because you don't want to spend so much time restating the case back that you miss space, like for actual theory, the theory conceptualization, because that's actually the whole point of this course, is the theory stuff, right? But this helps give you a whole picture. So we start with descriptive data, which is basically who is the client, the basics, name, right? Age if you have it, cultural background, race if you have it, real basic things like that. Okay. Then you want to give a short description of relevant history. This is going to be pretty short because, again, when you get to the theory-based part, you're going to be adding in a lot of details. Just some basics on what's going on with the client. Okay. If you were doing an intake with a client, an actual client, you would get lots and lots of information. Families, their social contacts, their work, their interpersonal style. You want to know their support system, all of those kinds of things. Okay. Environmental factors. What is their home life like? Do they live alone or with others? Are they caretaking for others? Those kinds of things. Socioeconomic status is important. Again, what is their support system? Is it important to know that they're renting, or that they just bought a house, or that their house is in foreclosure? Those kinds of things, right? Things that are going on in their environment. What is their work life like? Things like that. Then personality dynamics. What motivates the client? Right? Now, sometimes personality dynamics and strengths are the same thing. Their strengths are what motivates them. But you might have a thing where what motivates somebody is being able to provide for their family, right? Their work life motivates them. But their strengths might be that they're a hard worker, that they have good social skills, those kinds of things. So they're not always the same, but they can be. So then we move on to the presenting problem, right? We want to know what is the initial issue from the client's point of view, right? This is objective, right? So you could say the client is frustrated that she has no space to work at home, versus something that would be considered subjective would be the client needs to become okay with not having a workspace. That would be my own personal opinion. That is not objective. So the presenting problem should be one sentence from the client's point of view. The client point of view presenting problem should be one sentence. And some of the things that when you're speaking to a regular client is, when did you first notice this problem? What have you done to combat it? What have you worked on? Those kinds of things. But for the cases that I'm going to give you, you're going to have some of that information. So you give one sentence on what is the initial issue from the client's point of view, which will be different from the theoretical point of view, by the way. Now, I know that the majority of you have not had multicultural, and I'm asking for you to give cultural considerations. What I'm looking for here is some basic insight into yourself and your client. If you've had multicultural, then you'll have a little bit more knowledge here, okay? So and again, this can be one or two sentences. What are the things that you need to keep in mind in regards to the client's culture and their environment? This will help you check your biases, right? Do you have to think about the majority culture and how that might be affecting your client? And how do my background and experience help or hinder me with a client? Just because you're very similar to a client doesn't mean that you're going to be a better counselor. That actually makes it sometimes harder to be objective because you have things in common with the client. Again, ethical considerations is the same thing. Some of you guys have not had intro, you have not had ethics yet. I am looking for a basic understanding that there might be some ethical issues here. So what do you need to keep in mind to keep the client safe? What biases might you have about the client? And what are some other ethical considerations that you might have about the client? One or two sentences, that's all you need. Now we're to the theory part of the conceptualization. So the theory conceptualization, really important. This is going to be the largest part of your conceptualization for a couple of reasons. One, this really gives you the main idea of what's going on with your client. And number two, this is a theories class. I want to know that you understand the theory base. And the only way to know that is by you doing a really good job on this section. All right, so the theory base is going to give you the overall interpretation of the client and the issue. And while you're doing this, you're going to use the language of the theory base, the concepts from the theory base, any models, underlying issues that the theory base would say would be important. And for every time you say this is what's going on with the client from the theory base, you back it up with information from the case conceptualization. We're going to talk more about that in the next video when I actually complete an oral case conceptualization. The next section would be the goals from the theory base. Now, goals need to be measurable, and you need to really think about the difference between long-term and short-term goals, right? A short-term goal is something that you could probably accomplish in maybe 6 months. So a client having high anxiety going to no anxiety, right, would not be a short-term goal. It's not realistic that someone could do that in 6 months. And a long-term goal would be something that takes you probably longer than 6 months. Now, I'll give you a little bit of leeway for this, but if you put something as a short-term goal that is very obviously a long-term goal, that's going to be a problem. So the goals need to be from the theory base, right? You just did all of this conceptualization to tell me what's going on with the client, right? And they need to be measurable. So what does that mean? Okay, so you might say, well, one goal is for the client to reduce his stress. That's great. But how do you know when that happens? How do you know when the client meets that goal? Versus a goal of the client will reduce his stress at work from an 8 to a 5. That's probably doable in 6 months, right? And it's measurable, meaning that there's probably an instrument that you used to get to that point, okay? So you have to be very clear. Your goals have to be measurable, and you have to have a long-term and a short-term goal for the client based from the theory base, right? And we're going to, again, when we do the case conceptualization, we'll talk about that. Then what techniques or methods would you use with this client? Again, you now have goals. So what will you do to get to those goals? What techniques or methods? These need to be individual for this client. It can't be something like, okay, so Freud would say make the unconscious conscious. That's a technique I would use. Or I would use dream analysis. Great. But why would you use dream analysis with this specific client? What would be the purpose? Because each client is an individual, giving a broad goal is not going to help you with your work with clients, okay? And the techniques must match the theory base and the conceptualization you just gave. So what you might say is, I'm going to use dream analysis with this specific client to go back and heal some of the early childhood wounds so that the anxiety at work will be reduced. That's specific to that client, okay? Now for resources, the point of this is not what resources you can give the client, but what resources you need to help you with your work with this client, right? What resources, what information, what knowledge do you need? Okay, you might have to do some research on whatever the issue is. So I might need to do some research on anxiety, right? But stating things, I will do research on anxiety, is not resources. So again, we're going to talk about this in the case conceptualization, right? So saying I'm going to go to a Gestalt workshop is fantastic, but you need to give a little more detail in order to learn this and this and this, right? Or I'm gonna read this book, or I'm gonna read this article, okay? Or I'm gonna watch this particular video. All right, so that is the really fast basics of what the outline of your case conceptualization is going to look like. But within that, you need to understand that counselors tend to make errors. And these errors have to do with our own biases and our own frame of thinking, right? Our own lens that we view everything from. So I want to go over some of these because it's important to understand what type of errors we can make when we're inferring things about clients. to try to prevent them. Okay, so the first one is single cause etiologies. This is making an assumption that an issue is from one specific cause. We are very complicated human beings, and it is extremely rare that one thing will cause our anxiety or one thing will cause our stress levels to go up, right? So saying, oh, this client just needs to work on their relationship with their partner and then their stress will be lowered, is making an assumption that there aren't other things going on in this person's life or within the person that is also causing a high level of stress. Okay, so problems are multidimensional. Availability heuristic. This is very common. When you learn something, you want to use it, right? So if I go to a great workshop on bipolar and I learn how to diagnose bipolar and really work with clients who are diagnosed with bipolar, and then I go back to my clinic, all of a sudden I see that many of my clients could be diagnosed bipolar, right? Probably not the case. Not everyone is bipolar. This also happens when you do things like learn a specific technique, like empty chair, and you want to use it with everybody. It's a great technique. It works really well, but it only needs to be used with specific clients, not with every client that you see for the next 2 weeks, right? So just because you've just learned about it doesn't mean that it is appropriate for all of your clients. Okay, and confirmatory bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms your pre-existing beliefs. Okay, so I think everyone is angry. Excuse me. I think everyone is angry. You must be angry too. So all of my clients have anger issues, right? That was my dog, not me. The other issue is saying things like, well, all teenagers are anxious about dating. Of course they are. So you're coming to talk to me about this date you have, you must be anxious. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Just because I believe something doesn't mean that everyone is actually dealing with that issue, right? 3 more, or 2 more really. Fundamental attribution error, which is also known as correspondence bias or attribution effect. This is when people tend to overemphasize the client's personal characteristics and ignore the situational factors. For example, you have a child in your school that keeps banging his head against the wall, and the assumption is the child is trying to be disruptive, when the reality might be that the child has a severe ear infection and is in a lot of pain, and the only way to stop the pain in one part of your body is to create pain in another. Or it could be that the child has sensory issues and is sensory seeking and needing more sensory input, right? So there are ways to help deal with those behaviors if you're not making automatic assumptions about why somebody is doing something, okay? And illusory correlations are thinking things are connected, they're not. For example, one of my friend's kids, when they ate Chinese one night and then he got sick, right? But it was actually the flu. But he never ate Chinese again because he made an assumption that the Chinese made him sick. Or making an assumption that because someone has a specific sexual orientation, they probably need to work on dealing with that sexual orientation or work on romantic relationships or being a partner or whatever, when that might have absolutely nothing to do with why that person is sitting in your office. Okay, so it's important to understand that good inferences are crucial for case conceptualization. When you make assumptions about clients, even though I'm giving you a piece of paper, 1 page, and telling you to infer things, you have to be careful not to let your own biases get in the way of understanding the client in an objective way through case conceptualization. So this is the end of part 1, case conceptualization. If you have any questions about the material that you wrote down, something you don't understand, upload them to Cyber Cafe.